All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's 5:30 and we're going to get this Active Transportation Committee meeting started. I will hand it over to the main chairs. I'm not sure who is facilitating the meeting this time. Whoops, sorry, hold on one second. Sorry, I've got some technical pieces to handle here. Looks like our live stream is working, so I don't need to hear myself twice. And looks like everyone's on, and just a reminder to everyone to mute yourself if you're not speaking, to all the panelists who are on. And that if anyone from the audience has any questions, we have about 9 people in attending along with our 12 panelists this evening. If you have a comment, you can either let me know in the chat or raise your hand, and I will be working with the facilitator to let the chair know who would like to make a public comment. I will let's see, who's the main chair and facilitator tonight?
That's a good question, Shane. Robbie, do you want to do it today or do you want me to do it?
I'm willing to, but if you're feeling like you want to do it, I'm happy to hand it off to you as well. So.
Okay, so Robbie will be doing the chairing of the meeting today.
All right.
Sounds good.
Great.
All right, sounds good.
Well, I just threw the agenda up there, Ravi, so if you want to run us through the first pieces, and then I can feed you the first couple public comments.
Great.
Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to remind everyone that if you want to make a public comment, raise your hand or let me know in the chat. I will bring you on to be able to ask your question or make a comment. And we ask that you keep your comments to under 3 minutes and that you're courteous and that the comment period is for public comments around active transportation in Eugene. And we welcome hearing your input and feedback. And I'm going to start off with Duncan Rhodes. And Duncan, you should be on.
Thanks, Shane. Duncan Rhodes here. I've got 3 comments. Number 1, thanks for getting the stop signs put up at the intersection of Potter and East Amazon. That ought to make things a lot safer at that intersection, especially when the schools go back in session and we've got little kids running back and forth across that street. Second comment, is there any way we can keep the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on East Amazon? 35 is going to be too dadgum fast. I understood a couple of years ago that we only got 30 miles an hour because it was a construction zone. And I'm wondering if there's any way to extend that. Third comment is I'm in Jefferson West Side now, and I was talking to the chair, Ted Koopman, and he was unaware of the open streets stuff going on. And I wondered if you guys had reached out to all the neighborhood associations and clued them in about that. Thanks. Bye.
Great. And I don't know, do some ATC members want to give some feedback on that comment before we move on, or gather a couple more public comments? I guess I'll move on. We have one other person that's raised their hands, and then if ATC members or staff have some comments back, we probably have some time this evening. So next up I have Hillary. And you're on, Hillary.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jane. Hi, everybody. My name is Hillary Mankowski. I'm the Safe Routes to School coordinator for the Bethel School District. And I have a concern for the speed limit on Echo Hollow. It is a short road, about a mile, stretches between Royal Avenue and Barger Drive in Bethel. There's one middle school there, and there's one high school. And there's also an elementary school not too far away, and the kids cross Echo Hollow quite a bit to get back home. The speed limit is 35 miles an hour. It was set January 21st of 1958. And there's just that renovation is happening at the Echo Hollow pool. There are 200 new drivers at Willamette High School. And the speed limit in residential streets, as we all know, is going down to 20, which is super exciting. And you all recently put some speed bumps on Marshall because people were going too fast. And so one of my concerns is that going from 35 onto a 20-mile-an-hour street is not going to be as feasible for a lot of people. And I think it'd be really great to encourage kiddos to walk on a street that has a lower speed limit. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Hillary. And let's see, lower your hand. Is there anyone else in the attendees who would like to make a comment? So I see no other hands raised or comments in the chat or Q&A. I will hand it over to you, Ravi, but I will make one quick comment to Duncan, just to let you know on the open streets piece of your inquiry, that is going to be on the agenda tonight. There's an open streets update that's on the agenda for 6:40. So I'll have a little bit of information about what we've done and what we're doing. And it looks like we just got another hand raised. So I'll take one more public comment. And Harry, you are up. You can unmute yourself and.
All right. Hey, Shane, can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay, great. So I did have a comment. I'm in River Road area, and our community organization was looking at the open streets program, and we were concerned that because some of the streets in River Road are not city streets, if we would be applicable for that. And I don't know if you guys could address that during that time for the open streets later.
Yep, I can definitely talk about that.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm. Reed. Go ahead.
I can't find the hand raise button.
Yeah, I don't think panelists have it, maybe.
Don't have one. Okay. So Duncan, it's not our intention to change East Amazon back to 35 miles per hour. We're looking at ways of keeping it at 30. And then Hillary, I think we've talked about this through Vision Zero. We're trying to get our streets lowered and nothing faster than 35. And Echo Hollow has come up a few times as being too fast even at 35. And so I think we're looking at more of a blanket approach where we could actually take streets by functional classification and lower them the same way that we're lowering local streets from 25 to 20. We would do something similar with collectors or arterials. And we're still working on what that might look like, but Echo Hollow is certainly on that list.
Great. Thanks, Reed. Any other comments on public sharing? I'm going to just bring us back. There we go. We don't need to see the full agenda all the time, and I'll wait. I will note before I hand it over back to you, Robbie, for running through this. This is definitely going to be more of, you're going to see a lot more of me tonight than you have in a while, because a lot of these updates on the agenda are projects that I'm working on or have been working on my team to share information from. So I'm going to stop now and let you do a couple of pieces, Robbie. So if there's anything that folks want to reply to the comments or do these next logistical pieces, then I'll jump back on when I'm up.
Thanks, Shane, for handling that part of the meeting. And thanks, Duncan and Hillary and Harry, for your comments and for the clarification, Reed. And I think the next thing, as I recall on the agenda that was up, was approving last month's minutes. Anybody have any comments to make about last month's minutes? Would somebody like to move to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve last month's minutes. And I'll also make a note that I think Daniel is in the waiting room as an attendee. Shane, if you could let him in.
Second.
Thanks, Josh. Thumbs up to approve. Looks like it's approved. Okay. So it looks like we're back to Shane talking about the 13th Avenue Education and Outreach.
Great. All right. Well, that was just enough time to allow me to get Daniel in. I think if anyone sees anyone else floating or that needs attention, that'd be great to have you watching over that. I am going to make really quick check here and maybe Reed, I'm going to see if I can make you a co-panelist so that if, as I'm presenting, anything comes up, you can take care of anything. There we go. All right, I'm going to start my screen share again here and talk about 13th Avenue Education Outreach. So my first slide is intentionally boring. No, okay, it's not really intentionally, but it is. This is basically what we're going to talk about tonight, and I wanted to show the campus to downtown bicycle connections first slide from our December 4th, 2013 meeting. This was the first meeting that we had, public meeting about this campus to downtown connection, where we talked about 12th Avenue and other ways to improve the connections between campus and downtown. This was done after the Live Move study that was done earlier in that year, and I think completed in about June of 2013. And so in these last 7+ years, a lot of work has gone into this project, and it's really exciting to be where we're at now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what our plan for is now that we have this project nearing completion. So we'll talk a little bit about the project, what some of our plans are around that communication, what our opening date might be, information a little bit about signage, and then talking about our celebration week and the volunteers that we'll need for all of that communication to happen. I do know that my computer has some audio issues where sometimes it fades out. So if anyone sees that, if you want to just kind of raise your hand and point to your ears or something, then I'll know I can maybe unplug and replug something and it gets better. So this construction project has been really exciting to see happen. I want to give a shout out to Aaron, who was one of the inspectors on the project in the lower left-hand part of the screen there. And Aaron has been giving us photos and updates on this project as it moves. Brian Root was the project manager, and he's also been really great. Reed has worked really hard with him to make this project happen. And obviously Reed did a ton of work before, during, and currently on this project. And so we are shifting from this being a planning project to a construction project to now this implementation project, where a lot of our team is starting to do a lot of work to make this new infrastructure something that's really successful. And I want to just highlight what it took for us to get here a little bit. And one of the cool things I wanted to show real quick is this little video. If you'll notice them working on all this concrete work, and in the middle of the picture there, they're doing some hand concrete work. But from this machine that created this divider, and this is how the same machine was used for the Amazon protected bikeway. And I just wanted to show it because I think it's pretty cool. Let's see if this works. So as you can see, I assume everyone saw that on your end, yeah. So that machine just pooped out the curve there. There's some adhesive in the gray there, and then the wood that you see on the right side of the screen is where we had curb cuts or spaces where it needed to have an opening. There would be wood that would be down there, and then they would clear that away, and that's what they were working on by hand. And so this was a really fun way to see sort of what it takes to create these protected bikeways the way that we do them. Whoops. So some of the other infrastructure pieces, if you haven't been out yet to drive or ride through the corridor, I just wanted to give everyone an idea of what it's looking like. As I mentioned, we're still a bit away from this being complete, but a lot of the pieces are down. This is the raised crossing that happens at Lincoln Street. This is the jog that occurs at the end of the west side. And so this, the two-way protected bikeway ends and people turn onto Lincoln here. This is also where you can get on the bikeway. And we have a couple ways that we're gonna have to communicate to people how they can get on and off this protected bikeway. This is looking east in the upper left-hand corner is looking east down the protected bikeway from near that raised crossing. And so at each driveway, we have these green stripings to just raise awareness that this is where, to people on bikes, that this is where cars might be crossing, and to people driving that they're crossing a bikeway. And then we have new wayfinding signage that we've installed throughout the corridor. This is a different perspective of that Lincoln and 13th connection. This is looking north while you're on Lincoln and wanting to proceed north. Car traffic used to be allowed to turn left here and then right. That is no longer allowed. It was still happening and might still be trying to happen, but we're doing some things to try and prevent that movement from cars. It is a one-way and it's a right turn only now for motorized vehicles. Bikes can go straight and get onto the bikeway, either to go westbound for that 1/10 of a block, or to go eastbound towards campus. They can also, rather than going straight, they could go up onto the curb cut and cross this on the raised crossing to get into the bikeway. And as you could see in that picture before, there is both a white marked crosswalk and a green marked crosswalk. It does have curb cuts the whole length, so it's a very wide crossing. And that's going to be a big piece of us for communicating around what that means as far as a bike crossing, but in a crosswalk. And so, bikes will need to cross at a pedestrian pace to have the rights and responsibilities of a pedestrian. So to have vehicles yield to them, they will need to act as pedestrians. It doesn't mean that you have to get off your bike, but you do have to be riding at a pedestrian pace and make sure that vehicles have time to stop. And then they would be required to stop for you, just like at every marked or unmarked crossing at a corner. So that's going to be something that's part of our communication pieces for the public and for people using these facilities. This is the other angle, again, looking east towards campus from the beginning of it. And then on the right side there is the far eastern end on campus. And this is the two-way bikeway where it is not officially protected because in this one block we have back in parallel parking and we didn't have the width for vehicles to be able to make that maneuver and have a protected bikeway. And so we're going to watch this section and see if there's any other improvements we need to do to this to make it better. We already have been talking about the potential of improving that striping or what kind of things we might do to make it clear, and then work with the campus on what is the transition on the Kincaid side to allow it to make it really clear that, to get on and off of this protected bikeway. And then the intersections are really important pieces. That really is one of the key parts of a protected bikeway is how are bikes and pedestrians and vehicles treated at the intersection. We have a lot of different things that we're putting into this. We have these little mini islands that when they first went in, people said, oh my gosh, is that what the protected barrier is? And that thin little piece that you see on the upper left-hand picture is just a sort of lead-in to the larger protected section. And that allows larger vehicles to make the turn but still have that ability to make it mountable if it's needed for a double trailer or a fire emergency vehicle. But to prevent people from trying to make the turn too tight and getting stuck into the bikeway, or make it too fast, and so it will slow people down on those turns. And then you can see here one of our signal team working on one of the traffic lights. This is the piece that is currently under work and is going to be the part that is making it look like it's all done, but it's not, because we have a lot of work to do on the signals. Andy, I was just talking with Andy, our traffic engineer who runs the signals, and he said that he thinks this is going to be the piece of infrastructure in Oregon with the largest number of bike signals in sequence. So he said, take that, Portland. I think there's a lot of things about this infrastructure that are going to be new to a lot of Oregon and some parts of the US even. So it'll be interesting to see how it functions, and we want to get it right. And that's one of the reasons that it's going to take a little bit longer, because we want to get the signal timing right to make it safe and functional. At these signals, we are going to be controlling movements so that there are less conflicts. So if there's left turning vehicles, we're going to be having vehicles make those movements at different time than people on bikes. We're going to be looking at how do we make a green wave so that we can get bikes through in an efficient manner in both directions. But when you're dealing with two-way bike traffic and vehicle traffic that is turning, there's a lot that our team's going to be working on to get right. This little turn pocket here is at Willamette and 13th. And so this is looking west. So if you are northbound on Willamette Street and you want to get onto the bikeway to head west, you would cross at the green, cross 13th, and get into this little waiting box and wait there for the bike signal to change, which would allow you to then get onto the westbound protected bikeway. This section in the middle, if you look down there west, you say, well, I don't see the protection there. And that is true, you don't, because the fire station is there. And so we have to allow them to make pretty wide turns coming out of there, and the barricades wouldn't have worked there, the curb. So that is one section of the two-way bikeway that is open. But again, we have separated turn movements. So if a vehicle is heading east and wanting to turn onto Willamette there, their movement is going to be at a different time than people on bikes. So those conflicts should be pretty rare, and there aren't any driveways in that section where cars will be crossing the protected bikeway. So we think it'll be okay. It's one of those other pieces that we're going to be monitoring. And then finally on the right side there is this bollard in the middle of the bikeway, and that's just to help prevent vehicles from entering the bikeway, just to make it clear that it's not something you can enter and drive onto. We have seen that happen on East Amazon, and we're just trying to make sure that that doesn't happen in this corridor as well. We have a lot of work that we're doing around what signage are we missing, what are the messaging pieces that we're going to have volunteers work on, that we're going to have out there on A-frames, on separate signs. We're working with our traffic operations team to figure out what do we have now, what are we going to need temporarily, and what are we going to think about doing permanently to make this facility work best for everyone. We don't want to make it so confusing with sign clutter. We want it, to be clear just by the infrastructure what is happening, but there are certain things that we know that we're going to have to communicate on. And this, wait here for green was something that Portland was prototyping and working with, getting permission to implement. And we're working on pieces as well. And Reed is working we'll work with the traffic operations team to figure out what is best for us. As you might see in this picture on the right side of those signals, and then a little mast arm that's going up above one of those signals. That is a camera, and those cameras are infrared cameras that will detect bikes. But bikes do need to be in a certain location. They aren't as fine-tuned as where they might need to be if it was a magnetic detector, one of the loop detectors. Those you kind of have to be in a very specific spot, but in the cameras, it's a little bit wider of a range. So, but you still do need to be there and not like in the crosswalk or in front of the crosswalk. You have to be in a certain area to be detected. So we want to be able to communicate to that to people, and then communicate how best to use the facility. Again, hopefully the infrastructure makes it clear, but because it's something new, not a lot of people have probably ridden on these kinds of facilities, especially students as they're coming to the University of Oregon. And so we know that we're going to need to communicate those pieces in a really clear way. And so, this is sort of our first pass of what are the key pieces that we need to let people know. So I'll let you kind of read through those and think about them. And
Kind of lost you there,
oh,
Shane.
okay, so just look through these really quickly, and we can come back to this and talk about what pieces are we missing, or what do you think we also need to communicate on. I do see that there are some questions that come from attendees, and after I get through this section, we will take some questions from the committee members, and then if there's time, we can open it up to questions from others. Robbie, can you remind me my time on this one? I think it was, it's either 6 or 6:10.
Looks like 6:25.
6:25. All right, great.
We got plenty of time.
Good. Okay. So I wanted to highlight that besides connecting campus to downtown and the town to gown connection, a really big piece of this is also thinking about the businesses that are along this corridor and that have been impacted by construction, but also that we can really help and really promote during this outreach time. We think this protected bikeway is going to be a really great thing for businesses along the corridor, and we want to highlight that during the celebration piece. And so we've already gone out and started to do, Lee did a lot of work before this project to talk to businesses about the project and then the construction. And then we're going back out and are going to be talking to them about ways to incentivize people to use this facility, and talk about our celebration week and what kind of specials that we can do with them, and ways that we can encourage people to use this facility and stop along the way to utilize these businesses. There's just some classic Eugene businesses, this House of Records, barber shops and salons, and great restaurants, bike share stations, and a lot of wonderful businesses that we want to encourage people to use, and we want to work with them to highlight access to their business through the protected bikeway. So that's definitely going to be an important part. And one of the things, let me pull up actually really quick some notes I had about that and talk a little bit about that celebration piece. What we are currently thinking about and what we'd love to, besides having ATC volunteer for that education and outreach piece, we'd love your thoughts and volunteer efforts in the celebration week. Right now, we're talking about doing a ride and seek, where we'll distribute a fold-out map of the corridor with different deals that businesses are going to offer and different happenings that are going to be going on. and we'll distribute that through the businesses and give them out to people who might be in contact with people, because we're not going to be holding one large event like we would normally. We would normally hold a massive celebration event, but we're not going to be doing that this year because of COVID. And so we want to do something different, and creating this ride and seek will be something that people can do on their own throughout the week. We're going to highlight businesses that people can get to, and especially calling those out who are offering deals for people who ride bikes there or have happy hour specials or whatever. We are working with some folks to do added distant rides, and we're giving them tips on how to do rides if they haven't in COVID times. We're talking with Gears, Safe Routes to School, U of O Bike Program, Live Move, and Best to hold little mini community rides, so that we're not going to do one big ride, but hopefully do lots of little rides that allow us to outreach to a lot of different people. We're talking to the David Minor Theater about potential outdoor movie projection of a single movie or a film by bike festival during that time, where they would put that event on and we would promote it. I know that Kelsey and Cass are talking with Josh from U of O about coordinating potential tent or outreach place where we'd have info and giveaways during some of the high traffic hours around campus. I know they're not doing a lot of direct student outreach, but I think that there's some. Josh can maybe talk a little bit about that. There's a printmaker who's doing some prints from manhole covers, including one print from a manhole cover on 13th, and they're going to be promoting some things during the celebration. The Move is going to host an info booth for students on campus during high traffic times as well. And then we're talking about other ways to best engage people. We are planning a video tour of the bikeway, so that we'll do some sort of live stream or recorded thing that if people can't get out or they've moved away and want to see what it looks like, we'll have a way to do that. We're going to create a pro tips video. So if you've seen the Peace Health rides, how to lock your bike, how to sign up, we had 10 different pro tips that we put out with Peace Health about a year ago. And we're going to do one that's focused on the 13th Avenue Protected Bikeway. We're going to do a live stream talk about the project that I'm going to host, and we'll have people who were involved at the beginning, people who were involved in construction, and talk about the celebration week. So we'll do a live stream about that people can call in about the project and ask questions. Yeah, and then so that's sort of our plan right now around the celebration and launching of this once we know when it's going to be. And so the basic idea is that we open it, and to give us time to open it and get out some of the kinks, hopefully in a week or two of operation, and then have this celebration. So the celebration won't happen right away, because we don't want to encourage people to come out the first day and then have some issues with signal timing or something, and people go, wah, wah, wah. We want something that is working well and that people are excited about. And so so it'll be a little bit of running the show before we actually get into the celebration piece. We're probably going to tie this in with one of our citywide programs that we are calling the Shift campaign. And this is something that we're working with our sustainability office on. And the idea is to talk about a lot of different ways of how we're making shifts within the city to meet our climate and energy goals. And so, our Smart Trips program and Open Streets and some of our other work that we're doing might fall under this Shift umbrella, along with Food Not Waste and fleet work and other pieces that we're doing as a city. And so there's some little bit of fun wordplay that's happening with that as well. And so we want people to shift how they're thinking about getting around in a lot of different ways. And we think this 13th project fits really well into that. So that's what I have on 13th to share right now. I'm gonna, before we get into questions, I'm gonna check in with Reed and see if there's anything that I missed in those pieces that you wanted to touch on, and then we can get into some Q&A. Nope. Great.
I guess I could expand a little bit on, Shane showed a sidewalk cling there that says wait here for green. That's an experimental sign. There's a lot of experimental signs that different communities, especially Portland, are using right now at bike signals, and we're not really allowed to use any of those right now because this is a federal project and it's not in the MUTCD. So that's the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and we have to abide that when we install facilities using federal money. So it could be that we'll come back. I think a big part of this is going to be when we launch, we're going to want to have staff out there so that we can observe how the intersections are working, how people are behaving, both driving and walking and riding, and seeing if there are signs or additional information that would help to solve some of those issues that we're experiencing. We're doing our best to get enough signage out there prior to launching the facility so that there's enough messaging that most folks should be able to figure it out. And then we're going to try to flood the corridor that first day with enough staff so that we can sort of reinforce good behaviors and establish good habits by, reminding folks to stop at red lights. If you can turn from the bikeway, which you should be able to turn from the bikeway at all of the bike signals, because there will be a unique bike signal that operates separately from the traffic signal. So that's how you'll turn right or left to get out of the bikeway, for example. And there are a couple streets like Willamette and High and Pearl where you'll also get a unique signal on the cross street. So on Willamette Street, there's going to be some loop detectors where you could turn into the bikeway. Pearl Street's going to have its own signal so that you could turn both ways into the 13th bikeway from Pearl Street, for example. So there's a lot of little changes like that people will need to discover, or that will have to provide enough clues through signage and pavement markings that are allowed so that folks can be able to figure out the corridor. I think we can get away with a lot using A-frame signs and doing some temporary yard signs. So we're working on messaging that will explain how stuff is supposed to work. And then anything that could be considered an operational sign has to go through our traffic operations engineering team. And so that's where we start to fall back on, what's allowed for us to do this. And so I'm putting together a signage plan right now that I think will augment what's out there. I'm still having some issues figuring out what's going to be an infrared detector. It looks like everything on 13th Avenue. So when you hit a signal on 13th Avenue, there's going to be a camera up there. It's passive detection. You don't have to be in a certain spot. It'll just find you. However, on those side streets, it's probably going to be a loop detector. And so we're going to have the same loop detector issues that we have throughout the city. And so we've got signs that we can install that are MUTCD approved that will explain that. Alder at 18th, for example, has a loop detector in the pavement, and then it has a little bike symbol over the top of it. And we can augment that with a supplementary sign that says, wait on this symbol for a green light, that sort of thing. And so we're just trying to make sure that all of that signage is out there so that people who want to get more information or who are looking for signals as to how it's supposed to work will be able to find that. And we've got all the wayfinding signs up right now, which I think are good. But we don't have some of that operational signage, which I think will be necessary for launch. And I know Shane will get into this too, but part of our timing issue is turning everything on and making sure that everything works. And so there's a lot of new technology that's going in this corridor. It all has to work. It has to talk to itself and to other signals along the corridor so that we know what's happening. All of that's going to take some time to figure out. And then there's also sort of, we can sort of turn up the frequencies on things. So if we're finding some people but not other people, we can kind of experiment with that too. But that's why I think it's important to have volunteers out that when we open this, so that we're recording those types of issues, seeing what's going on. If it's not working, we need to make adjustments as soon as we can. And as I said in the past, I think if we want to see more of these, if this is sort of the prototype for what these could look like, then this has to work. And I'm hoping that we have enough out there so that this will work as intended. And we're going to do everything we can to ensure that. But we'll find out together what happens when we turn everything on. And we've done everything we can to make it as safe as possible. But there could be some, we're already talking with the signal crews about this. It's unfortunately, it's not, because 13th Avenue for motor vehicles is eastbound and it's a two-way bikeway. The frequency of the signals don't necessarily time out such that you'll actually get a green wave necessarily, simply because of the distances of the blocks and how 13th ties into the rest of the downtown grid, which is all a timed system. And so it's going to be really challenging to figure that out. And it's something that we can do into the future as needed to make sure that it works better and that we're addressing concerns about compliance with signals, which I anticipate will be an issue, but hopefully not, because this is a red, yellow, green signal. People should be able to figure that out. And then we should be able to go out there and reinforce messaging. And if we have to use enforcement, then we may choose to do that as well. And then we'll see how it goes. So with that, I think Shane might have a little bit more to talk about with the education campaign, but we're still trying to figure that stuff out because we don't have a solid deadline for when all of this is going to work right. It's hard for us to say when we're going to roll things out. But what we are doing is assembling a plan that does a good job of saying in week 1, we're going to do these things. In week 2, we're going to do these things. In week 3, we're going to do these things. We're going to monitor these things throughout. Here's who we're going to report to. When they get that information, here's how they're going to choose to resolve that. So we have that plan. It's evolving, but it's basically in place. We just don't know when we're going to be able to launch that. So I'll stop talking now and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so first, any questions from the committee? And then I did see at least one question come in. Let's see, Andrea and then Josh.
Yeah, I had 2 things. First of all, I wanted to understand how the southbound traffic on Lincoln at the junction of 13th is going to work, because I think that's a stop sign both ways right now. And I was kind of curious how that's going to work in terms of whether people will be able to cross over over 13th and continue. That was the one question. The other question I had was when I was down there checking it out, running or riding my bike around there, I was a little concerned about the drivers being aware of the two-way traffic. It's one thing to detect pedestrians, to make sure that they don't make turns, but I'm wondering if there's going to be no turn on left.
So southbound Lincoln works the way that it did before. So it's an offset intersection and there's a stop sign, stop control. So it's the same as it was before. You can still go southbound. You just can't go northbound any longer. I saw a couple, so I'm going to need to go on the corridor and kind of look at how the signals work too, because I'm trying to put together that supplemental signage plan. But I saw in a couple photographs that Shane had, we've got some part-time restriction signs. And so those are those signs that are dark until actuated by the bikeway. So an example of that is Alder Street at 18th, where we have a part-time restriction sign, which is a no turn on red sign. And that happens when the bike signal goes on so that we don't have people in cars driving across the bikeway. So on the very right-hand side of this, that dark box by that middle yellow signal is a part-time restriction sign. And what that would do is it would say for that left turn there, that turn is restricted when the bikeway is green. So that should prevent those conflicts, because right now in Oregon on a one-way street, you can turn left or right on a red. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at, and we've taken care of that through signals. And the compliance we've seen so far with those part-time restriction signs has been pretty good. As I mentioned, we have that one on Alder at 18th. It seems to work okay. We have some out on Barger, which seem to be working very well. Hilliard at 18th has one. Go ahead.
The East Amazon protected bikeway has.
I guess I was more concerned. Sorry, I was more concerned about the north and southbound almost. You know what I mean? Especially
there are some signs, so there should be some signs that are getting installed, just like on Alder Street, that's a two-way bikeway. And so that's how we've been handling the two-way traffic on one-way streets, is we'll actually put a supplemental sign up that says two-way bike traffic. It's a yellow sign, has two directions and a big bike in the middle, and they're on Alder Street. They'll be on 13th as well. If they're not up yet, they'll be up soon. And then we have the green paint. So yeah, hopefully it's as intuitive as we can make it. And where we have seen encroachment into the bikeway, we've installed some flexible delineators right in the center line of the two bikeways, so that hopefully somebody driving into that would notice right away that like this isn't where they're supposed to be, because they shouldn't be running over things. And then I think there's some additional striping that we can do through the intersections with what we call cat tracks or elephant feet, which are those dots that sort of show if you're making this turn, this is sort of the line you should follow to make the turn. And we can actually lead people out of the bikeway and into the travel lane where they're supposed to be with some additional striping. So all of that is part of this project.
All right, and I think Josh next.
Yeah, Reed, you mentioned that FHWA would not approve whatever signage you want to put down, but I know that in the past we've gotten exceptions or special, is the city looking at getting permission to do something different? And that's just going to take whatever time it takes to work with the federal government?
Yeah, part of what Shane mentioned, you might have gleaned when we said we started this in 2013. There's been a lot of hurdles along the way. Some of that has been the funding and cobbling together enough money, and then realizing that the signal infrastructure that we require to make this work means we're replacing all of the signals along the 13th Avenue corridor. And that is what we're doing. So we have all new controllers, all new signals, all new signal poles, all new corners, all new concrete, all new conduit. All of that is brand new. And so that's a lot of complication and it's a lot of cost. And so we spent most of our engineering time making sure that that would work. And then the signage piece, we've done the minimum of what we think is required to make it operational. It's those extra things like adding those pavement legends to explain how the signal works that we don't necessarily have a plan for yet. But we're watching the outcome of the PSU study that is looking at those different pavement markings for signal actuation very closely. And that should be done, I think, in spring, Andy thought. And if basically those get approved, or if they get interim approval, then that's obviously something we could always add in the future. So what I anticipate is that we'll learn a lot when this thing turns on, and we'll see what we need to address based on behavior. And so we've done our due diligence in terms of getting everything out there to make it predictable, and to have enough operational signage out there so that people can understand how it's supposed to work. And if we have to reinforce behaviors, those are the signs that are less, or that aren't necessarily approved yet. And I hope that we can add on to that when we need to. But we are a bit limited right now due to the funding that we have and what we're allowed to put in the corridor, just because of how long the process took and the paperwork we signed and the funding that we have.
All right, I'm gonna move on to Pete, and then I think Daniel maybe. So Pete, you're up next.
Actually, yeah, I was going to ask some of the same questions that Reed just already answered. So about cars turning left and other things. I imagine those things are going to be some pretty learning curves, but the added signaling, like you were talking about, that's like at 18th and Alder. I've seen that work, and so I'm glad you guys have really thought this out. It sounds like.
Hope so.
All right, Daniel.
Shane mentioned something about experimenting with bicycle timings to get a green wave going. Is that something that we have the ability to make to adjust without getting up on a forklift? What will that process look like?
Yeah, that's the signal team working in with the controller boxes, and as Reed mentioned, the large amount of piece that went into replacing these signals. We couldn't have done that with the other signals that we had in there. Plus, we needed to add to those because of the two-way traffic, and so we had to upgrade. And so we've upgraded to some top-of-the-line signals that allows Andy's team to really try out some cutting edge pieces, and that could be one of them. And so he's very interested in trying to make that work. But 13th is part of a system for all modes, and buses, pedestrians, people biking, people driving, and it's got to move a lot of people. It's definitely a prioritized corridor for people walking and biking, but we're trying to move all modes through and figuring out the best way in the system. So, but these signals will allow us to do some really good, things that we can't do in other corridors.
The other challenge with the green wave is that people riding bikes move at different speeds. So you think about the progression speed for like a motor vehicle, and you can just say, it's, downtown Portland, for example, is famous for 16-mile-an-hour progression speeds. If you go like 16 through downtown Portland, you can hit all the greens. Like on our Oak Street, if you go 20, you'll hit all the greens. And so our progression speed is pretty easy to do in a motor vehicle. It's not on a bike. I think our progression speed is either 10 or 12 miles per hour. So if you ride faster than that, you'll probably be stopping at a lot of the signals, and that's just going to be how it is. And in like Shane mentioned and I mentioned previously, it's part of a grid where unfortunately 13th Avenue is the first one in with all smart signals. And so it doesn't talk with the rest of the system very well yet, but that's obviously where we want to go in the future so that we can have more green waves throughout and just have a better system that responds to where people are. And this one will be able to do that. I don't think it's going to happen from the outset, and it could take a very long time for us to get there. But right now we're concentrating on that progression speed, and hopefully it'll get people through the corridor efficiently.
Yeah, and once we know what that is, we can let people know, like, if you go this speed, then, you'll make this wave. And there's some really interesting things that they're doing in some other countries that have done the green wave with, rabbits and turtles and sort of lights that they can change to tell you like, oh, if you speed up, you'll make this light, or slow down, take it easy. You're not going to make it, unless you go really slow. And so there's some fun things that, down the road, if we think that we can implement those, it would be fun to look at. But at the very least, be like, if you ride 10 miles an hour, 12 miles an hour, you can make a few blocks of green or the whole corridor or whatever we end up doing. I think it's definitely something that we want to look at.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up then. So smart signal, so we can modify it remotely. Is there what's the feedback there? Is there any sort of input, or is it just relying on human observation?
We have access to it remotely, so they're all connected cellular. So we can at the command center, we can, much like this image, have all of our signals up and follow somebody through the corridor and adjust the timing that way.
Okay, so you've got cameras there too.
So we got the cameras for the infrared.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Cool.
And will it have artificial intelligence so that it can learn what kind of traffic patterns there are?
That's a good Andy question.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a plugin. I doubt that we started out with that system, but what I know we bought with our controllers is the ability to upgrade, and we've got the latest. So if that's a plugin, then we can definitely do it.
Okay, folks, we're at time for this right now. So do we have any sort of last comments before we move on to the next stage of our meeting?
And because this is a big project and I'm on these other agenda items, I can definitely fudge 5 on the strategic plan to add a little bit more to this, because this is an important one. So I do see some things that came in from attendees. But I want to give priority to committee members if there's any other questions that you have. I like the idea of a slug being the more appropriate signal for slowdown for our area. So there's some comments and some pieces in the comment or the chat section. If members want to look at that. And I think the other questions got answered. I did want to mention Jenny Engel had said something about doing a asking about doing a maintenance piece as part of our education and outreach during that ride and seek and Bike It event that we're planning. And we have talked about that, and we're actually going to work with Peace Health Rides to do a drop by the shop where people can, we're going to have sort of office hours and people can stop by the shop anytime virtually if they have some questions about biking, Peace Health Rides, how to fix something on their bike. And we're going to have a couple of the fleet techs in doing a little live stream at the Peace Health Rides shop, and they'll be working on the Peace Health Rides bikes, and you can just pop in anytime on the Zoom and ask questions and do some ask them any maintenance or just general bikey questions that you have for them. So that is one thing that we've talked about doing. Any other questions? Anyone, if folks want to read any of those chat pieces and filter any of the questions to me, I'd be happy to. Okay. Seems like we're good on that piece.
Thanks, Shane. Our next item is Shane.
And I've lost my control bar here. Oh, there we are. Great. So I'm going to talk just a little bit and hopefully listen a bit to your thoughts as the Active Transportation Committee on our next Active Transportation Strategic Plan. The current Active Transportation Strategic Plan that we have was Move Huge, and that strategy was created to run from 2017 to 2021. And my plan was to run through this year and then create a final report at the end of 2020 and sort of see where we were at for 2021 and start this process. But now that COVID has hit and so much of our programming has changed, I thought that it was a good time to start the discussion. I don't think we have to complete this in any rush, but we do have existing goals and vision, goals, and actions that we're going to do a check-in on. And I'm working on a current report that kind of gives what's been done in the last year and a half, 2 years. Where are we with each action item? And some of them we've done, some we've done a little bit, but there's more to do, and others we haven't even touched. And so what I want us to be able to do is to, as a committee, figure out what are the next phases. We're going to have new infrastructure on the ground. We will have run some programs and known what works and what wasn't working as well. We have new programs that we're starting because of COVID. We're transitioning Sunday streets to open streets. We might still do Sunday streets when we're able to again, but we're still going to have open streets as well. I think that that's a program that we have talked about continuing even after COVID as a potential program. And so we want to talk with the committee about what are the things that you're thinking about and what's your vision for the next 5 years. I think it's a really prime time for us to make some big changes and to look at what our programs look like. We're in the middle, or we're at the beginning of working on a new traffic demand management, TIA, traffic impact analysis plan that is going to change some policies within the city of our requirements for businesses and developers and what they're going to be required to offer as different transportation options programming and what programs we implement are going to be a part of that. And so that is a project that Larissa and myself and our team are working on. And we're working with our planning department, and we're going to be bringing in community members and having stakeholder groups and different committees working on what are the pieces of our local TDM projects. We don't have a very robust TDM program, traffic management program. And TDM is very similar to TO. Some communities call it TO programs and some call it TDM. And usually when you're dealing with businesses and developers, they call it transportation demand management, but it's all transportation options. It's all, what are the programs that make it easier for people to drive less single occupancy vehicle and allow them to take transit, walk, bike, and move about their communities in other ways than single occupancy vehicles. And so when I say TDM, it's just like our TO programs. What does that programming involve? And for us, that has been smart trips and Sunday streets and breakfast at the bike bridges and May is Bike Month and all those programmatic pieces. And, you know, our student bus program and the, you know, the programs for employer passes with LTD. Just what are all those things that make it easier for people to choose not to drive? And we have a lot of those programs in place. It's also a very interesting time because we are losing our transportation options program within our transit agency. Point-to-point solutions has dissolved in COVID times, and we are talking regionally about what does that mean for our regional program and what are our programs going to look like when we don't have point-to-point solutions and LTD coordinating those regionally. And LCOG is probably going to step in some. We are potentially going to need to rely on some nonprofits to do some work that we hadn't had them do before. We might have to have staff at the city and the county and LCOG step up in different ways. So all of these shifting things to me are opportunities. The change in our structure of bike share is certainly one of those as well. So that just kind of gives you the ground of where we are now and why this active transportation strategic plan is important. This was our current purpose statement for the 2017 to 2021 plan. And it's our strategy for how do we reach those goals of tripling the percentage of trips made on foot, by bicycle, and by transit by 2035. And so looking now at a 2021 to 2026 plan, it's sort of the midway point to that tripling. It's an important time to really continue that momentum and figure out how do we become that platinum level bicycle and walk friendly community. And what does that future plan look like? Do we keep with the same purpose or are there other pieces that we want to add to that? Do we want to follow this similar structure of having that vision, the different goals and the actions that it takes to get there? The way that the strategic plan was structured before was utilizing the 5 E's at the time with the 6th E overlay of equity. And just as a quick reminder, that's education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and engineering. And then equity overlying that. There's a lot of talk in the transportation options and general safe routes to school and TDM work around, do those E's still fit? Is equity being incorporated enough? Is enforcement really an E that we want or need to include because of the challenges around racial disparities that happen because of disparities in enforcement with systemic racism? And is that a piece that we want to change as well? And how can we make that change effective to reach our goals? So I'm going to lay that groundwork and then open it up a little bit to discussion of the current plan and future hopes and aspirations, and which direction you think, what are some of the things that we should be working towards and working on as we come up with this new strategic plan.
Shane, can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, and then I see Pete raised his hand, and so if other folks want to just kind of, oh, it looks like you all do have the ability to raise your hand because Josh did. So you can find the raise the hand button. That'll be easier for me to track on there. So the question is, how do we want to, what is, I guess let me just take a quick step back. The Active Transportation Committee, formerly BPAC, has always been the committee that has helped us with sort of being the sounding board that has helped facilitate, our original strategic plan really recreated the BPAC again after it had not been active for many years. And so the original strategic plan was the formation of the BPAC. The next strategic plan, this strategic plan, was really created by the BPAC and city staff. And the BPAC had a big influence on what form that took, what were the programs that we really wanted to highlight. We did those through open houses and through different meetings. And so I just want to use this as a kickoff of, encouraging you to look again at the strategic plan that we have and think about what are the current visions, goals, and actions, and what do we want to do moving into the future. Let me stop screen sharing so we can all see each other a little bit better. And then I'll let Pete go, and then I'll go down the list of the hands that are raised right now. Nope. Oh, Pete, you're on mute. Maybe I'll come back to you, Pete. Yep, okay.
Shane, now you're on mute.
All right, Josh, you're up. It's good.
Sure. So I just wanted to note that I don't think equity has been included quite so much. And I think it goes back to that core mission statement of tripling the mode share. What I observe is that the people who most need to be shifted are people like me, who are white, male, middle class. Those are the folks that need to be adopting active modes, but they're not the people who need the most help. And so I'm not really sure how to reconcile that, but it's something that I've struggled with.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's, it's something that our team is talking a lot about right now. We're doing a lot of work around equity, and I think that for sure this plan will incorporate it in a different way than previous plans. But yeah. Any other thoughts on that, especially as people go through their questions, are welcome. Grace?
Yeah, thank you. I have quite a few random thoughts, and kind of my first one is wondering if we want to create some kind of system, like a shared document where we can add thoughts over a period of time, because I have some high level ideas as well as some kind of nitty gritty ones, but I'll just mention the ones that popped into my mind. First of all, the first thing in kind of thinking of what Josh said was wondering kind of if we could examine or separate out the equity and sustainability goals in active transportation in our community. I think oftentimes we put the two together, and I think maybe the needs of kind of communities that are vulnerable or have not been served fully by the community are probably different from the needs of other parts of the community. And so I think just looking at, like, is active transportation the best solution or meeting an immediate need for people in those communities? And then also kind of looking at how can we decrease the barriers to using active transportation, and how can we better understand those barriers? Those are some high level thoughts that I have. And then I'd also love to see the Street Read program continued regardless of COVID. I'd love to keep East Broadway closed. That's been amazing. So those are my ideas for today.
Daniel?
Yeah, I'll try not to preach too much. So some of you might have seen the post on Streets blog this week. Why most pedestrian infrastructure is really for drivers. Talking about equity, just if we're trying to make it easier to bike and to walk, really what we mean when we build this infrastructure is we're making it easier for people to bike and walk while still maintaining full maximum throughput of auto vehicles. And it is a zero-sum game in the end, in many ways. And I think that we need to seriously consider in these large plans how we can strategically remove access for fast throughput of motor vehicles, because you don't really need infrastructure to bike. You just need there to be fewer cars.
Okay, and Steve?
Yeah, thanks. I guess one thing that occurs to me about one thing we're learning from this year is the whole concept of crisis management and how it fits into all of our other plans. I think the increased focus on equity is great. It is exactly the right way to evolve the structure that the plan is based on now. Thinking ahead, I would think it might be good to have some kind of an overlay with any other kind of crisis management that's going on in the city. And because there are underlying assumptions, like how much do people use transit, or how much will people, what will the population be, or even, how much water is available. I mean, there's a lot of, what's being pointed out to us is that things can change very radically. So I think in terms of transportation management, there ought to be a review of the underlying assumptions that undergird the plan, and then what's the response if those assumptions change quickly, for what it's worth.
Great. We've got a couple minutes more before I need to go on to the next piece. Nick, I've seen you raise your hand physically, but not on the board there.
Oh yeah, I was just going to note, I think education over enforcement is going to be something that we should encourage. I haven't seen enforcement really work on a lot of situations, but education is the way that you drive people through, learning and creating a better environment. Enforcement doesn't really monetarily affect our area and what we're trying to work for, but at the same time, what we really want is people to understand what's going on. And so if we're going to work on those E's, I think enforcement might not be in that field anymore. I know education, I think, has already been in there, but I just wanted to state that. Nope.
Great. All right, Julie?
So I'd like to be the other radical of the group that really supports what Daniel has to say. Frankly, cars, vehicles are the problem. And, the city has been very kind but appealing to people's good nature and wanting them to get on their bicycles or use transit really only ever shifts a tiny proportion of true believers. And, it does not change the average person. And to do that, you really have to make it a disincentive for them to get in their car. And I say this as a car owner. If it's inconvenient to go by car, then people will use the alternatives. And I think the city needs to frankly be a little harder hitting. And I think closing streets and making them bicycle only, which is a lot less expensive than putting, a project that costs millions of dollars and untold amounts of work like 13th, is closing a street and making it bicycle only is surely less expensive and it sends a much stronger message than the infrastructure, though I'm very in favor of infrastructure, of course. Parking, taking away parking places, trying to change codes as to what's required for parking, making parking very, very expensive. And I know all these things are politically unpopular, But if there was ever a time that we need to move forward from being popular and taking the popular view, then I think this is it. And the kind of climate change situation that we're in right now with the fires and everything, this is a time to say, this is, sorry it's inconvenient, we know it is, and but here's what we have to do. So, I'm with Daniel. Make it hard to drive.
Great. And Pete, did you have something?
Yeah, just thanks. Sorry, earlier I was having trouble unmuting, and anyway, I was I live downtown, and it's one of the things has changed is the parking lots here are they're not full. People are not coming downtown to work as much, and I think there's a good possibility that some of that workforce is going to be from home for a very long time, and some jobs are just going to be remote now, and that's going to be it might be part of what we do is because a lot of people's daily trips and cars or whatever is just going to work and doing their basic errands, and if you can figure out a way to kind of um, encourage people to work from home, you're getting less car traffic. If they find ways to get to stores, I love the way that the open streets is kind of designed to connect neighborhoods with the commercial areas. So I think there are the ideas that you can kind of think about how do people actually move around, and if we can look at, okay, if the lifestyles are going to change with work styles, maybe we're going to have to think about innovative ways to have people walk and bike and have to get their errands done and get other things done. So those it's not that doesn't necessarily mean big projects. So
Great. All right. Let's see. I think Grace one more time, and then if anyone who hasn't spoken has something really quick as well.
I just wanted to add, I think looking back to that vision of tripling the mode share, I think that's a very high level goal. And I think at this point it's very unlikely. So I think it would be prudent to re-examine that and what would really be necessary to make that happen in the time frame that we're looking at, and that it's outlined in the city goals and guiding documents.
Yeah, I think that'd be worth a conversation of sort of seeing where we're at and where we're headed, and is what's in the strategic plan and the TSP going to get us there. So this is the beginning of the conversations around this. I encourage everyone to look again at the strategic plan that we have. If you need a copy, I can send it again, but if you just Google Eugene Active Transportation Strategic Plan, it'll pop up and you can highlight it and mark it and do whatever you want and send me your thoughts on it. We will make this a part of a future agenda items, and we'll have some direct action where we might even break into some smaller groups or just do some work around this. We'll be having community meetings, and I'll be setting up a work plan for sort of what we're going to need to do as a committee and as staff to create this next action plan. And so stay tuned for more on that.
Oh, and Shane, just quickly, there's an assessment report coming out for 2018-19, and when is that?
So that report we'll have done by the end of the year for sure, but I'm hoping in the next month or two. All right, great. And I think I'm definitely out of time on that one, so I'm going to move into my next agenda item, which was open streets, I believe. Yes. Okay, I've only got a few minutes on this one, and I will share my screen just to give you a quick update. So we did launch Open Streets in Bethel, and it was a great learning experience. Cass has done a great job of working on community outreach out there, being out in the streets, talking to people, fielding phone calls and emails, going out and moving signs, replacing them as needed, making adjustments to some of the signs that we originally put out. This was our basic format of cone, local traffic only, open streets cone with a map on the backside. There were some sections where we just had an open streets ahead. One thing that we found was on those main streets that people were using as cut throughs, we ended up putting up a sign before they even turned on that street that recommended what street they should be using. And so I'm blanking on the name right now. I'm gonna say Hawthorne. But whatever the through street was, we would say, you know, through traffic only would be there, but then, or local traffic only, but we would say through traffic use Hawthorne. It wasn't Hawthorne, but, and then we would have those sort of leading up to that street, so that each street they tried to turn into, they would hopefully see like, okay, it's down here, and they would use that street, which was more of a neighborhood collector street, and keep them off of this neighborhood street. We heard from people that they saw a reduction in the amount of cut through traffic. We are doing some counts before we take this down to see what cut through traffic is now, and then we'll go back and see if this had even a more long-term effect after a month or so to the cut through traffic. We definitely heard some people who were frustrated by it, and we could tell by going out there and seeing the signs moved off to the side that they didn't want to be inconvenienced by having to go around these. And some of those were people who lived in the neighborhood. Some people might not have actually lived in the neighborhood, but wanted to use that street as their through street still. We definitely had people who came up to us while we were out there and thanked us for doing this, asked us why we were doing this, and that it was a silly waste of money. So it definitely ran the gamut in that neighborhood, and we are now excited to think about what we're going to do different in these next phases of open streets. We are looking at the Northeast neighborhood and sort of this area around Monroe Middle School is one of the neighborhoods that we're looking at. So that's the one on the right. Just a small little section through there to connect up with the commercial area of Gateway, and then the parks and the area around Monroe Middle School, and then the commercial area up by Coburg. There's not a really great connection along Coburg that we can facilitate, but we're hoping that we can get them to the good crossings that are there of the traffic signals just through that neighborhood. So that's going to be an interesting one. We've got a neighborhood association who's excited to do something there. This might be sort of a first touch in that neighborhood, and if we get the Northeast Livable Streets project done, we might do another project out there that can be a little bit bigger once that project is done, either this year or likely next, I'm thinking at this point. And then the other area that we're looking at is the Friendly neighborhood. They've been very excited about the potential of having something. And so we want to, our goal is to do this fall open streets, mostly so that we can practice again, putting these out, getting feedback from the community, making changes, and seeing how it's received in that neighborhood, and what we need to do to implement. And that's why we want to try to do two, so that we can see next year when we do this again, what are the things that we can do to really have more than one going at once, and what does that take for staffing, for communication, for outreach, for evaluation, to make sure that they're running smoothly. So we're expecting to have some different reactions from the neighborhood, because we're going to be in different neighborhoods, and from what we've talked to other communities about, it really depends on where it is, what kind of feedback and interaction and reaction and usage they receive. But we want to implement it everywhere to see what people's needs and reactions are to it. So, any questions or thoughts on open streets? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
What did you mean by everywhere?
Well, I think we want to be in different neighborhoods throughout Eugene. So it was important to us to launch not our first one downtown or in neighborhoods where we had received a lot of requests from Friendly and Southeast neighborhood and areas that we hear a lot from because they have very active neighborhood associations and citizens. But we wanted to get out and make contact in neighborhoods that we don't always hear from because, you know, they have more working families and lower income people who are too busy to give as much feedback as we hear from other neighborhoods. And so working multiple jobs. And so going out to Bethel was a priority for us because there is an active Bethel Citizens neighborhood association out there. And they often feel unheard or that they just don't have the representation. And so we wanted to make sure that we were out there hearing from that neighborhood and we want to continue that and that we're not going to just run these programs in places where people ask for them, but actually going out proactively, talking to neighborhoods to find out if they really do and not wait for them to come to us, but go out to them. All right, good. I almost caught up on time there. Let's see. Where are we now, Robbie?
Thanks, Shane. I think that's the end of the series of Shane presentations, and it looks like we are on to subcommittee reports. So who would like to report on their subcommittee?
I could.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I can briefly talk about programs. We have so the first thing we talked about. We have kind of a separate note about this. It sounds like there had been some discussion in the past about creating a communications subcommittee, basically a small group of us who would liaise between the ATC and say the Eugene City Council to kind of connect between the work that we're doing and implementation in those ways. So maybe not tonight, but what we could do here if we wanted to do this would be to come up with some initial topics that we wanted to bring to council and then also talk about who here would be interested in being on such a subcommittee and then how we would generate future topics. So that's one piece that we talked about, communication subcommittee. And then we also talked about Move Huge and some project ideas, possibly bringing back critical mass or some disaster trials.
Thanks, Daniel. Josh, did you want to go and talk about the other subcommittee?
Well, since nobody else was. So the primary thing that we discussed in our meeting last week was which segment of the path system city staff should look to in terms of designing for fixing. we used better words than that in the meeting. So in, was it 2018, 2017, 2018, the infrastructure subcommittee went through and ranked a whole matrix of different path segments that needed attention. And there were multiple different criteria that were used. I don't know that it's necessary to go into it here, but what kind of floated to the top was the Fern Ridge Path. Let me pull up the cross street here. Was it over by Garfield? Am I getting that cross street right? Yeah, it was the section over by Garfield where it is sort of sloughing off into Amazon Creek. And there's been some patchwork done, but really there's an entire reconstruction that needs to be done. And so we decided that that would probably be the best thing to next prioritize to start planning. So that was the primary thing we discussed. I know we discussed a couple of other things. If anyone else wants to jump in.
I can add some thoughts. One thing I'll add to what Josh mentioned for background is just that it was the shared use path maintenance prioritization. That's the fancy wording. Basically, Public Works does not get nearly enough money to maintain the shared use path system. And so we're using some of the pavement bond money for it, but it's only around $500,000 a year. And so it's not enough to do everything. And so we were looking at how are we going to prioritize that? And then a couple other things we talked about were to try and create a more robust wayfinding and possibly amenities system along the riverbank path trail system. And we mentioned quickly that Eugene put out an RFI for bike share operators and that we still didn't have the timeline for 13th. So we spoke briefly about those things as well.
I noticed.
Did you get any more information on the bidding process for West Bank? Do we know where we're at with that?
Excuse me, the West Bank has been bid. What happened to the schedule? I don't remember. I'll put something in the notes. That one in South Bank are sort of running at the same time, although West Bank has been bid. There's just certain periods of time when we can't do any construction because it's in the floodplain. And I think we're approaching one of those. I think we're in September now. So generally that's a do not start. So I will follow up with the project manager and see what the new schedule might be. I thought we were going to start a little earlier, but we didn't. So I'll have to put something in the notes.
Okay, thanks.
And this might be more a project update, but since someone mentioned RFI for Peace Health rides, I will just briefly. Whoops, I lost my place. Hold on here. If there's any other committee pieces as I find this, feel free to jump in. There we go. And then someone else asked a question. So the RFI for Peace Health rides did go out, the request for information. So we'll hopefully gather information from potential operators. We're also, as mentioned in the last meeting, that we're talking about a potential statewide program and what it would look like and what a nonprofit would look like who might run a statewide program with Eugene at the core and sort of the way that we operate at the core. We are currently working with Peace Health on their sponsorship of the system and just making sure that those funds are flowing to the city, and we will determine if that those funds will stay with the city of Eugene, and then we will use those funds as part of our contract work, or if they will revert back to how it was done with Social Bicycles and Uber, which is that they received the sponsorship and ran bike share off of those funds. Now that we are operating it this way, it's a potential that we would just keep that sponsorship and work with whatever provider who's doing the on the ground pieces. So that's just part of what we're trying to figure out. We are doing some fun and exciting things with the project, even though ridership has plummeted yet again with all this smoke. I think we had 50 rides the other day, which is very low for our system. And, we're often, in peak season, we were in 600 plus rides. So, being that low is expected with the way things are. But we hope that as students are returning and the smoke clears, that things will get picked up again. And we know that the 13th Protected Bikeway will certainly be one of those facilities as students who are our biggest users and they're back on campus, even if they aren't going to class, we expect ridership to increase again. So as I mentioned, we're working on a video for the 13th project, but the team is working on a video for the huge parade. And I want to encourage anyone that is involved in any kind of organization and would maybe have been in the parade, since we're not holding the parade this year, that they're taking video submissions and are turning that into a virtual parade. So check that out, look up the huge parade on Facebook or on our website, and there's some information on how to submit a video for your group or organization. And so we're going to do one for Peace Health, and it sounds like it's going to be a pretty fun video. We've got a great fun team working on it. As I mentioned, there's that statewide sort of what would it look like project going on with someone who was involved in Peace Health rides and Social Bicycles very early on. And so there's some good potential in there for what that program might look like. I mentioned this in other meetings before, but this Uber transition to the city running it, it had some bumps and still has some pieces that we're working out, but overall has some really strong silver linings and just potentials for growth. So as we go through the winter and then go into the spring, I'm really excited about the potential of the program. It's up and running. The fleet techs have gotten a lot of bikes in good shape and are getting them out there into the field and keeping things operating. We have been having an issue with some part theft, but we still have all the bikes and we're getting those parts replaced. But besides that, things are running very smooth.
Sorry, I got booted earlier. I assume we're doing info share?
I think we are.
Anybody else have anything to share?
I'll share that Duncan mentioned that there's a new four-way stop on East Amazon at Potter/Fox Hollow. We're evaluating that. We actually put up a 4-foot stop sign so that people would see it. And that doesn't seem to be big enough, but we're continuing to monitor it. And I don't think we can get a bigger sign, but we can put more light on it. So we're working on that. We also put another 4-way stop on 5th Avenue at Jefferson. If you ever go through there, Washington, Jefferson Park, Washington is the street that has a 4-way stop on both ends, and Jefferson doesn't. Well, now Jefferson does at least 5th Avenue, which would make crossing there a little bit easier. So both of those things were done by our traffic operations crew, and they're currently thinking about all the signs they want to put up over the rainy season. So if you have anything that you think needs to happen, you can just send that stuff to me and I will forward it.
And Steve, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that Climate Revolutions, which is a mass bike ride once a month, at least it was last year, um, but hasn't had a ride for several months because of the pandemic, is planning a ride for Sunday, the 20th of September, as a kickoff to the Climate Action Week. So it's 4 o'clock, Monroe Park, Sunday the 20th.
I have something. I saw in this week's In Motion newsletter a note about the digital billboard sign code amendments in Eugene. Basically, being able to change advertisements electronically. Growing up in California, I have some concerns about this because it's some concerns about distracted driving. So I think I'll go ahead and post that for anyone who didn't see it, but I'm going to go check out the public hearing.
Yeah, and our team members who worked on that gave us a bit of an update on it, and it sounds like, you know, it was our Vision Zero team members who were working on that. Yeah, and it'd be great if you could share that information. Other information share, and if not, then we do have some time for questions or other pieces. Okay. Great. Well, if there isn't anything else, I definitely have spoken enough. So let's see.
So maybe this week I will send an email to everyone here and we can think about the communication subcommittee and then maybe discuss it next time once people have had a chance to consider it, because it would be an extra commitment.
Yeah, and I did notice one other piece that's in that subcommittee report section on the agenda is the work plan. Is there anyone recollect that piece, how that got on the agenda? Was that another potential of a committee that was going to work on an actual work plan for the subcommittees or the committee as a whole?
Shane, I recall some discussion about work plan for the strategic plan for the importance of that as a roadmap to guide sort of the thinking of the committee.
Yeah, maybe that was all that was related to. Okay.
I vaguely recall that at a previous meeting we discussed having a work plan for next year, or perhaps that was in a transportation subcommittee meeting. But that may be something we want to discuss if, like Springfield BPAC, we want to do more specific topics at specific times in the year.
Lee, I know that Robbie and I are both terming out. I mean, I can't believe it's September already. Are we the only two that are terming out in December? You're muted.
You're on mute.
Yeah, there'll be 10 people left, so we need to recruit. We probably should talk about it in October. Kind of what kind of outreach.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about that because it's amazing how this strange year is kind of moving through pretty quickly. But just wanted to make sure that we as a committee were aware of who was terming out and what we need to do to recruit some new people.
Okay, well, I think we're at a stop of our meeting. See y'all next month.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
night, everybody.